If you're looking for a story with a happy or otherwise fulfilling ending, I'd advise you to look elsewhere. With that being said, if you need a stern warning why we shouldn't dabble in the unknown, read on. The autumn of 1997 was an eventful time for me. For the umpteenth time, my life was changed as I found myself ripped away from my friends and my family, moved yet again. It was also the year I came face to face with the Witherer. This time, our destination was the suburbs of Pennsylvania. This was a welcome change from the hustle and bustle of city life. For the first time in my life, I could see trees from my window. Not just trees lining the street either, but an actual forest with animals. I was a happy child growing up. I enjoyed all the perks of being from a wealthy family and made friends easily. The only common disturbance came from being moved from city to city on account of my father's work as a sales agent. We never stayed in one place for more than a few years. Despite fitting in well, having to make new friends each time we moved proved to be an emotionally taxing task. For years, I anxiously awaited my senior year, only for disappointment to find me again. I was just getting settled into my previous school in Virginia when my parents sat me down to reveal we'd be moving again. I wasn't enthused by the idea of starting over during the biggest year of my life to date. Like clockwork, I found myself being called the new kid once more. Being the new kid did have its advantages though. For one, I was always the center of attention, at least for about a week, until gossip and rumors dispelled the shroud of mystery surrounding me. You see, you're not the new kid when everyone learns your name. To my surprise and delight, I immediately made friends with the most popular guy in school, Charlie Rennick. Without fail, I found myself invited to all the best house parties every single weekend. Charlie loved partying. So much was the only thing he ever talked about. This made it even more surprising when he spent an entire lunch period nerding out and regurgitating an urban legend about a witch from the 1700s. According to Charlie, the Witherer was a soothsayer whose inaccurate fortune-telling got her beaten near death by the local villagers. The hate-driven mob didn't know or care that she was pregnant though. After her inevitable miscarriage, the sullen woman locked herself in her cabin to wither away and die. Charlie's agitation was palpable when he heard me laugh off his elaborate fairy tale as if it was a lousy joke. "We'll see who's laughing after we go through the ritual tomorrow," Charlie said, clearly annoyed by my antics. "A ritual? What are you, 12? This is the dumbest fucking thing I've ever heard," I retorted, still egging him on. I'd gotten him going by that point. Charlie spent the next 10 minutes describing the ritual he'd learned about from his stoner cousin, Jerry, in great detail. I didn't take his tall tale very seriously. Jerry was 37 and lived in his mom's basement after all. In hindsight, I should have. According to Charlie, the legend says that if you drive for exactly 27 minutes on Lost Hollow Road at 1:13 a.m., your car will stall. At that point, you need to exit your vehicle and walk westward through the woods for 3 miles. At precisely 2:44 a.m., you'll reach the cabin of the Witherer. Don't stop walking until you reach the dwelling. Once you arrive, you are to knock on the door twice before turning around the way you came, as if you were leaving. You don't actually leave though. Instead, a voice will beckon you inside. Upon entering, the Witherer will ask you to solve a riddle. If you answer the riddle correctly, you get to make a wish, and no matter how absurd the wish is, it'll come true. Marching through the woods in search of ghosts was not my idea of a fun Saturday night. But I didn't want to see Charlie get mauled by a bear either. I let out a sigh, and against my better judgment, I agreed. "Fine, I'll go with you, but only so you don't have to trek around the woods alone at odd hours." The obnoxious ringing of the lunch bell cut our conversation short, and after shaking Charlie's hand to seal the deal, I headed off to my afternoon classes. I spent the rest of chemistry and physics daydreaming about what I wished for if the ritual was legitimate. Would I wish for an endless fortune, a movie star wife, fame? On the off chance the Witherer turned out to be real, she could grant me any of those. The next day flew by as I concocted my exact wish and read up on different riddles. I spent over an hour peering at various maps, trying to find Lost Hollow Road, but no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't find it anywhere. I concluded that it must be one of the many unmarked gravel roads going up into the mountains. When the time to finally pick up Charlie rolled around, he emerged from his house with a bulky camera, presumably to take pictures of the fabled cabin in the woods. "Jerry said it was this one," Charlie said, pointing at a road highlighted on his map. This confirmed my suspicion. It was indeed a mountain road and was also most likely private property. We pulled up to the unmarked gravel road at 1:02 a.m. and cut off the motor to wait. Eventually we got to talking about what we'd wished for. Charlie said he'd wish to be richer than Bill Gates and monopolized the next 10 minutes describing how he'd spend his billions. His ramblings left me no time to tell him about my wish, but I let it go because mine wasn't anywhere near as interesting anyway. At exactly 1:13 a.m., I began the drive down Lost Hollow Road. After around 10 minutes, the radio was cutting in and out. I chalked this up to the elevation and dense forest canopy above. By the 15-minute mark, my headlights were flickering in and out, and I became worried that we'd have to turn around. I could barely see the road. Despite the strange mechanical malfunction, we pressed on down the ever-narrowing road. After a few more minutes of driving, it was clear that turning around wasn't an option anymore. I can't say for sure, but each time the lights went out, I swear I could see erratic, jerky movements ahead of me. Charlie was becoming restless by the 20-minute mark. The conditions of the road was getting worse at a rapid pace. It was crystal clear to both of us that nobody used the roads anymore, let alone high school kids in Honda Civics. Maybe we should turn back, he suggested in a crestfallen tone. And just where do you suggest I do that, you moron? Which side of the mountain do you want me to drive off? I snapped at him. After the harsh scolding, Charlie began smoldering quietly in the passenger seat. Despite being mad as hell at the situation we were in, I pressed on, ignoring that reptilian-like sense of self-preservation ingrained in us all. I continued braving the winding, crater-ridden road for a few more minutes before my car stalled and came to a halt in the middle of the road. A quick check of my watch revealed that, to my absolute horror, 27 minutes had passed since we started down the road. Charlie got out of the car and began walking into the tree line. Something wasn't adding up. The ritual was working too well. "Are you insane?" I yelled at him, petrified at the prospect of following him. He didn't answer and instead continued to wander deeper into the woods. With great reluctance, I followed suit. As we ventured blindly into the pitch-black forest, I could tell right away that there was something wrong with the place. No animals or insects were making noise. Instead, there was only an eerie hum that befell the entire forest. After what felt like forever, my heart sank as a derelict-looking cabin appeared in the maze of trees. The orange hue of a candle illuminated the one window as we crept towards it. "There it is!" Charlie shouted. Charlie lifted his camera and snapped a quick photo of the cabin before stuffing the Polaroid into his pocket. Is it real? I thought to myself as I swallowed hard and tried to muster up every drop of courage in my body. This time it was me who wandered forward. Checking my watch yet again in the candlelight radiating from the window, I saw that it was now 2:44 a.m. It was now or never. Without missing a beat, I gave the door 2 firm knocks with my open palm before turning around to see Charlie staring onward, slack-jawed. "You may enter." An ancient-sounding voice hissed at us from inside. Charlie and I lurched through the threshold in abject terror. The interior of the one-room cabin was plain and otherwise unremarkable, except for the single chair in the center. A dim lone candle stood next to the chair, illuminating all but the corners of the structure. For the life of me, I couldn't tell which corner of the room the voice came from. I couldn't help but retch at the terrible stench. The stench of sulfur and rotting meat tickled my nostrils as the disembodied voice spoke again. "Sit and answer well." Before I could react, Charlie pushed me aside and sat in the chair. He scanned the room anxiously as a dark, thin figure emerged from the shadows. The figure that emerged from the shadows and stood before Charlie was once human, but wasn't anymore. She was rotten, her flesh melted from her bones. What remained of her ancient skin clung to her fragile bones like plastic wrap. Where her eyes should have been, there were dark, eyeless caverns. The Wither is real, I thought, overwhelmed by a sick sense of dread and anticipation. "Make your wish, but do not speak it. Answer true, and I shall grant it," the Wither rasped. The room froze in silence for a moment before she rasped yet again. "I am lovely in the sun, but dwelt when left in the dark. What am I?" Charlie looked onwards in shock before letting out a cackle and saying, "Seriously? That's the infamous riddle?" I took in the pungent air and breathed a deep sigh of relief. "A flower," Charlie decreed proudly. Charlie's confident sneer twisted into a look of sheer agony as he collapsed to the floor, writhing in agony. As his teeth fell from his mouth, his nails were next to go as they slid from his fingers. Next, his flesh blackened with lesions that oozed pus and thick, black blood. Finally, his flesh turned into a liquid and dripped from his bones in chunks. I froze in watch and horror as my best friend withered away into a heap of human sludge. I knew that Charlie guessed wrong, and I only hoped I could guess correctly. Within a few seconds, Nothing remained of Charlie except a pile of gruel and bone. My heart raced as I prepared myself to die best I could. The Witherer turned to me and asked the same riddle that sealed Charlie's gruesome fate. To this day, I couldn't tell you what force compelled me to say it, but before I could think of an answer, I blurted out, "The Witherer!" The agonizing death that I was awaiting never came. Instead, the world around me went cold and black. The force of slamming into the wooden floor woke me up, and I frantically scanned my surroundings, but instead of the Witherer's cabin, I was in a normal-looking bedroom, laying on a hardwood floor. To my surprise, I wasn't dead yet. There was no pungent odor, no pile of remains, or any whispering crones. I had no idea where I was, but I was thankful to be alive. Instead, there was the smell of freshly cooked bacon and a soft voice of a woman calling out from downstairs. "Charlie, breakfast is ready!" My heart skipped a beat as I remembered Charlie with his camera as I reached into my pocket and pulled out a crinkled up photograph of a dimly lit cabin in the forest. At that moment, I knew that I answered correctly and gotten my wish. I was now the most popular kid in school. To this day, I'm still not sure if the hardest part of being Charlie is actually living his life, or if it was seeing my own missing persons poster plastered around town. So take it from someone who's living a lie for the past 23 years. Never go looking for the Witherer.